The cargo that's moving from the Trans-Pacific theater in through Canada will pretty much stay in that lane, even with the short disruption we saw last week. The bigger issue for American economy is the cargo that moves north-south. So whether it be auto parts that uses the USMCA agreement to go back and forth, grain, agriculture products, steel, that's what's impacted the most. You may see a couple of shippers in Asia try to book on trans-Pacific vessels coming down to LA, but it will be very small amounts in an already over demand situation versus the capacity.
Gene, I would think seasonally right here, we'd have retailers, starting to build their inventories for the holiday season. What's the traffic going through your port? What does it look like today versus some prior years?
Yeah, Paul, great to hear from you. We're up 18% year on year off of very modest comps, but we just crossed the 500,000 container unit mark last month, and it's only the fourth time in our history we've had more than 500,000 imports coming through Los Angeles. Big number for us, and it continues the trend that we've seen thus far this year. In addition, exports are now up 14 consecutive months year on year. So the volume as a whole is really great, based mainly on a strong economy and then some geopolitical issues around the world that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, so Gene, I'm curious, how much are your customers talking about the geopolitics abroad, but also here in the U.S.? Anecdotally, I keep hearing that certain companies are just holding back on investments until we get clarity on who's going to be in the White House. Are you seeing any of that?
In just about every conversation, Alex, it is an election year. And folks are looking to see and try to hedge as to what type of policies will be in place after inauguration. You've got a protracted labor negotiation on the East Coast with the Dock Workers and Employers Association that's coming up for expiry at the end of September. The Panama Canal drought issues have been in the news for well over a year and a half, and the ongoing security concerns in the Red Sea have stymied crossings at the Suez Canal for more than a year as well. All of that put together, fractionally, you see cargo coming to the west coast of the United States and specifically Los Angeles, in addition to the strength of that economy. That shows where the numbers are going.
Hey, Gene, just last week, Bloomberg News published a really in-depth big take story, and I looked at your world ports around seaports around the world and how some governments are using them as really strategic tools here because they're becoming so important for global trade. Just for the U.S., do you feel like our ports are where they need to be in terms of, investments, capacity, or does the U.S., whether it's a public-private partnership, need to invest more?
We absolutely need to invest more, but beginning with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and now applications that are in front of the Environmental Protection Agency, we've seen a focus on ports over the last 3.5 years here in the United States that we haven't seen in a generation. We'd like to have this type of federal investment budgeted annually. And I also know that the work here in California under Governor Gavin Newsom has the same bent, paying attention to these ports, investing not only in the infrastructure, but digitalization, as well as clean and green technologies. This has to continue, but I like the trajectory that we're on right now.
Going back to what you were mentioning about customers talking about election uncertainty, what's your best guess as to what happens after that? I'm trying to get a handle on, okay, now we know who wins the White House. Are we going to see a flood of money coming in, like a flood of buying, or is it just going to be incremental?
Well, Alex, take away the politics. The presumptive Republican nominee, but now Republican nominee, has said he wants to put a 10% tariff on all $3 trillion worth of imports that come to the United States, 60% on those emanating from China, and potentially 60% on automobiles and other products coming out of Mexico. That would change the landscape here at the Port of Los Angeles forever, and it would create inflation. On the Democratic side, what we've seen is a continuation of this tariff regime and get tough on China policy, but in very small, targeted ways. What happens to investment after this has to revolve around international and trade policy. What are we going to do to stimulate not only the continuation of that government investment, federal and state level, but how we can give confidence to the private sector to invest behind us?
Gene, you know, nobody has a better view of China than you guys in the port of Los Angeles. Are the boats still coming? Are they loaded as much? Because there's real concern about the Chinese economy.
Yeah, a couple things, Paul. When we concluded calendar year 2022, 57% of our business portfolio here in Los Angeles was China cargo, imports and exports. Right now, it's about 43%, yet we're still growing. We've been nimble enough here in Los Angeles to attract the cargo in Southeast and South Asia. There are more nonstop services being put in place by the shipping lines. Speed has always been our selling point. With cargo coming from Asia and distributing throughout the country, we keep these nonstop services in place. That speed variable remains in our favor.